What is strength training? Hello and welcome, it's Christian, and today I want to talk with you about what is strength training, a derivation of strength training, a definition of strength training, and the practical application of strength training. So let's get started. So what is strength training? Yeah, I think we need to understand the theory behind it before we get into the interesting stuff. Even though I consider myself a practitioner, I strongly believe we need to understand the why before we get into the details. So big shout out here to Simon Sinek and his book Start With Why. So it's a good read for everyone who wants to understand how we humans work. It's not about training, it's about understanding our why before we do other things. But let's not get off track. So, what is strength training and the theory behind it? So somewhere in 1600, 1700, Sir Isaac Newton sat in his garden and an apple fell onto his head. He was thinking about the universe and the apple fell onto his head. And suddenly he had an epiphany telling him there is such thing called gravity. From there he derived the second law of motion. The second law of motion says acceleration is produced when a force acts onto a mass. The greater the mass, the greater the amount of force needed. So therefore we know the formula is force equals mass multiplied acceleration, which becomes important later when we talk about training. So force is not only about the mass we lift, it's also the amount of acceleration we can produce onto that object. So a quick recap. Force is the product of mass and acceleration. The heavier an object is, the more force we need to produce to move that object for the same distance as a lighter object. And this brings us to the next formula that is important to understand, and it's basically that force multiplied by distance is work. Sounds a bit complicated, but it is not. So what that basically tell us, that if we look later at practical things, the depth in a squat, for example, is important because we apply the same amount of force over a larger or lesser distance. So whether we do a back squat, front squat, overhead squat, whatever kind of single leg squat, if we use the same weight and we go lower, we do more work than if we do the same weight and we go less deep. Yeah? So that's the next thing. Recap. Force equals mass multiplied acceleration, and work is force multiplied by distance. So yeah, let's get into the practical stuff. There was enough physics. It's important to understand, but again, I'm a practitioner and I want to get into the practical stuff as soon as we can. Let's start with the definition of strength. Strength can be defined as the ability to produce force in order to overcome resistance. Yeah, so we had that before. Force equals mass multiplied by acceleration. So everything where we exert force in order to overcome resistance can be called strength. Now, what is strength training? We need to train that ability to overcome resistance. And that can be in multiple ways. We can use free weights such as dumbbells, barbells, kettlebells to a certain extent. We can use our own body weight. We can use machines. We can use bands, resisted bands. We can also use chains. I think we have some chains here in the background, and I show that in another video. Yeah? So, important to keep in mind, strength training does not equal any kind of mode we are using, whether it's free weight or body weight or anything. Strength training is the ability to overcome resistance, to produce force in order to overcome resistance. Yeah? So, that's it for today, and I see you in the next video when we go a little bit deeper into the practical application of strength training. Thanks, guys.